need some muse to talk about when we're talking about virtualization and some place to apply these concepts to. So what I want to do is I want to introduce you to our friend here, Bruce Wayne. Bruce runs Wayne Enterprises. It's a large organization, but he faces most of the same problems that any business faces. He's trying to do more with less. He's trying to maximize the things he has, and he's trying to make sure he maximizes what he buys. Bruce has the issue with basically wanting to enable his staff to work more productively. He's tired of having the limitation of they can only work in one location, and they can only work during the business days. He's wanting to basically give the same access to everything no matter where they're working. He's also wanting to stop having the issue of the platform and the device being the issue. For so many years, we've had the issue where endpoints, IT said, no, you can't use that endpoint because it's not supported. Or, well, it'd be great if you could use that, but the application only runs on Windows. So he's actually asking IT to stop having that be an issue for them. He's also wanted to make sure his data is secure. I mean, again, the issue being is he's going to allow people to have access to his data in more places. He sure doesn't want someone printing out the next Batmobile schematic from their house. And he's also wanting to find a way to be more secure in disasters. He wants to be able to survive and be more, resilient in the event of a disaster. So how does Bruce Wayne go about doing that? Well, Bruce goes to his experts, right? So Bruce is going to ask Alfred. He's going to ask Lucius Fox, come help me solve these problems, right? I mean, he doesn't go build his own Batmobile. He finds it in the basement with Lucius. So today what I want to do is I want to introduce you to the experts that we've brought along to help us go through these problems. I have Tim Spink here with us, who's from Cisco Systems. He spent 7 years working with Citrix. He spent 4 years working with VMware. He spent the last 3+ years working with Citrix's UCS products. And I also have Andrew Schmidt here with us, who's actually from Citrix today, who has over 15 years of experience working in computing, storage, and virtualization. So I appreciate you guys making it out and working, coming out today for us. So y'all doing okay? Did y'all make it down from the hazmat issue this morning?
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So going back to Bruce Wayne real quick, if we want to solve Bruce's problems, are his problems pretty typical of what you're seeing in most businesses?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, how many times are we being told, do more with less? I mean, personally and professionally, it's something that we have to wake up and try to accomplish every single day.
That's, I guess the biggest thing I would say is he's actually got a bit of an advantage because he recognizes these problems. And a lot of times we don't realize a lot of times that we have these problems in place. We wonder why we're not as productive as we'd like to be, that we face challenges. And he's actually done some of the groundwork for us already and helped identify where his challenges are.
So taking the whole work, doing more with less, I think one of the biggest problems we have in IT is that we go out and we buy a server, right? We buy this server and we want to have it run this application. And so the software specs say we've got to have a certain amount of processing power, a certain amount of memory, a certain amount of storage. But at the end of the day, we never seem to take advantage of all of it. And so it sits there idle, and then someone comes along and says, well, I want to add this another application. And it's like, well, we've got some additional storage over here we could use and some computing power here and some memory here, but we can't get all of it, so let's go buy another server. So if we're taking his whole, let's doing more with less, let's utilize what we have, how can Cisco help with that?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, a lot of people are probably sitting here today going, what in the heck is Cisco doing, building servers? And I remember a little over 3 years ago when I came over to interview with Cisco, one of the directors asked, he looked at my resume, of course, my last 12+ years had been spent over at Citrix and VMware software companies, and he said, you've never sold or positioned or focused on a server in your life. Why would we have you come over here and represent our server technology? And I had to argue with him. I go, I beg to differ. I go, I've never seen an organization, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, I've never seen an organization go out there and say, hey, let's go ahead and buy this server, and then once we have the server, let's go find some application to go ahead and run on it. I go, I've probably sold more servers or positioned more servers over the last 12 years than the server manufacturers out there, because when somebody would go look at a Citrix-type solution or a VMware-type solution, they would standardize or set their mind on an application or a workload, and then it would say, all right, based on my environment, what is the best server platform to go ahead and run? And so, it kind of turned things around, it turned the discussion around, and it made them understand that, the tail doesn't wag the dog. People don't buy, servers to go ahead and figure out what applications to run on it. They go ahead and buy the applications or decide on the application first, and then determine the best specs to go ahead and deploy on the server. So,
but wait a minute. So back to the question: Cisco's making servers. That's HP and Dell's thing, at least until recently. So, why even get into this?
Yeah, exactly. So kind of looking at the theme of football training camp starting here on Saturday with the Falcons. we had the opportunity to be the Monday morning quarterback of the server industry. And our goal wasn't to come in and do exactly the same thing that everybody else is doing from a server perspective. These up here are some of the accomplishments and some of the differentiators that we have in the server industry that are unique to us. And the first one that you can see on here is we can go ahead and typically deploy the same amount or more workloads with half the amount of servers and infrastructure that our competitors can. And some of the ways that we do it are we leverage Intel processors like everyone else does, so there's been a lot of innovation with Intel, but we've put more memory and more I/O and more bandwidth on our servers than anybody else. And you'll see that outside. We have a server out there that has 48 memory DIMM slots in a small form factor. That allows us to go ahead and deploy more workloads, at a faster speed than most other folks. The other thing, too, is if you looked at the last 10, 15 years, there's been no one out there that's gone after the big three. When we talk about the big three server manufacturers, there's been a few small folks out there, but in order to go after the big three, in order to enter this market, you have to have an infrastructure that can go ahead and support a server market. And what I mean by that is you have to have depots set up so that if you decide to go ahead and purchase one of these servers and a fan goes out in that server, you better have a new fan within 4 hours. And there's not a lot of organizations that already have that infrastructure set up, and Cisco does. Cisco can have a new part to any organization within 2 hours around the world. And so the combination of some unique value props that we see on this slide that we can go over in detail when you all have a chance, as well as the ability to go ahead and support it with the support infrastructure we have is the main reasons we entered the market.
So for us IT guys, and so I want to speak to the IT people for a minute in the room, we're saying that TAC actually is going to support servers now. I can call the same TAC people that I'm used to calling for switching and routing in 24 hours a day. I'm going to get really smart people who actually can help me.
Yeah, but even better than that. I mean, Cisco would have been naive to think that, hey, let's take this whole network and organization over at TAC, and let's go ahead and teach them how to support servers. So we didn't do that. I mean, we have the TAC organization, the TAC infrastructure around the world, but we went to the big three out there, and we poached their employees, and we built up TAC with not only the infrastructure that we have at TAC, but with the specialties that we were able to take from the other server manufacturers out there. So I guess yes, and even a little bit better.
So going back to the why this matters, we're putting more memory, more I/O on it. That's going to mean that when I buy this server, if I am doing virtualization, I'm able to put more applications and more server infrastructure on the same on less hardware. Is that the real?
Exactly. That's one of the key components up there. I mean, we have organizations like you can see right here, the benchmarks of hundreds of virtual desktops on a single server. I have an account up in Atlanta that has over 300 virtual desktops on a single server. I have another organization right down the street here that's getting that type of density as well. So absolutely, the goal is to go ahead and get more density, better performance. But then when you think about it, historically, the benefits of Cisco from a networking perspective is to go ahead and also enable better performance over the network and do it without compromise. And what I mean by that is if you look at a lot of server rooms out there, including our own that we have, there's tons of cables and tons of infrastructure coming out of the back of those servers. And kind of, again, in the theme here of audio video coming to see a movie, imagine if you can go ahead and run all protocols, 1 gig Ethernet, 10 gig Ethernet, storage protocols, whatever protocol you need to deploy in your environment over a single cable. Similar to the way you do it with an HDMI cable coming out of the back of your TV into your receivers and everything else. That's one of the key concepts that we came out and brought to the server industry was a technology or a concept and a solution called Unified Fabric. So over a single connection, and connections that are a lot less expensive than dedicated connections that you see on environments today, we can deliver all of those protocols over a 10 gig communication. Now we know 40 gigs down the path and 100 gig after that. So yeah, the answer is to go ahead and provide more density, but not do it with a ton more infrastructure. Do it with less infrastructure.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask. So, I mean, so what it said like you just told me was this. This is what you've just shown me, right? I'm going to go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff and make it a really big, complicated effort. So, I mean, is that what we're going to have? Are we all going to have to go out here, small to medium-sized businesses, a lot of us, and got to invest in that?
No, and that's what our goal is, to avoid this type of discussion. So if you give us the opportunity to come in and sit down and talk with you and draw a whiteboard out, our goal is to not draw this. This is what we see. If you Google this, this is a competitive reference architecture for 5,000 virtual desktops over an iSCSI SAN connection. And this is painful. And if you actually, I know you can't see this because it's an eye chart, but if you look at it, there's tons of Cisco switches inside of that architecture. And frankly, Cisco's loved this in the past because it's driven a lot of port licenses for them. That's not the direction that we're going. That's not our focus on the data center. We have a completely different strategy to go ahead and deliver more technologies than this with a lot less infrastructure.
So, okay, so let's back up. 5,000, that's great. There's a few people in the room that get close to that scale, but let's talk about 25.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't, on that last slide, you can't start with 25. It's impossible. You better be committed to going to 5,000. Even if you start with 25 day one, you're going to be paying for a 5,000 user infrastructure. So this is our whiteboard. This is where, again, when we talk about the unified fabric and the analogy of the HDMI cable infrastructure, the way we do it is with a unified approach. When we talk about unified fabric, our switches and our servers that we have, again, can have a single connection coming out of them, or 2 connections for redundancy. And then more connections you add is for bandwidth, not for functionality. A single connection provides all the functionality that you need. So this is our stack right here, and this is what you're going to see outside. And it's a solution that could start with a dozen concurrent users, a dozen workers that you have out there, or scale here, you can see 5,000 plus users connected up to it with both virtual desktops, server class virtual machines. It's the same exact infrastructure. Our goal in this type of environment, if you start with 25, what you're going to go ahead and add to the solution to increase the capacity is processor and memory from a compute standpoint, and then disk drives from a storage perspective. The switch infrastructure and everything else stays exactly the same. So that's a major difference.
So if we're looking at a design like this, we're basically talking about a server or 2, a SAN. Now, I know we don't have a SAN, we don't have a storage person here, but you both, especially Andrew, you've got a significant background in storage. Are there companies out there making SANs that can fit the 1 to 6 terabyte space, which is where most of us live? We live in the space of, we aggregate all of our data. We're talking about a terabyte is all. Is that out there?
Well, one of the first things is, being an engineer, I've got to clarify your question there. It depends on what we're using it for. One of the challenges we have is when we talk about storage, it's usually capacity. With desktop virtualization, which we'll talk about a little bit more, performance gets to be very critical. So a lot of times we're driven, just like with other things, well, if I need this functionality, I may not be able to be where I would be otherwise if I wasn't doing this. So that gives us some additional concerns when we talk about building an environment. But there is definitely some things down into very reasonable price points that will support virtualization environments. And there's a lot of, I don't want to call them tricks, but there's techniques tuning that we can do that we can optimize an environment that if we perhaps don't have a SAN storage architecture, that's ideal for us because simply the price point to get at the target level of performance is so high. There are ways we can offload a lot of that and use a more cost-effective solution.
So the answer is, so seven servers, we come to a typical business at 7 or 8 servers potentially that we can now consolidate down to 2, offload the storage to a single unit, and we're talking about EMC, Left Hand, which is now HP, NetApp. I mean, there are people out there making products that are geared at a small business. And again, we're not talking about having to go out and buy Clarion EMC for $50,000, $60,000.
And it's one of those things is where you've got some flexibility, a couple of different choices available. If you really don't have something in place where maybe you've got a traditional file server and you've got a lot of those other bits and pieces around, when you consolidate, you can leverage a lot of the capability of those storage systems and possibly even eliminate some of those servers that you'd otherwise virtualize.
Okay, so small business, we're looking at, we can get storage consolidation now, which we historically have had a hard time getting. We now can get computing that, quite frankly, is going to be in the same cost construct as buying any other rack mount server, but what we're buying is actually something that can let us grow it. 146 gig plus in some of these servers? We're talking about large.
Oh yeah, some of these servers now we're well over 1.5 terabytes of memory, and again, it really wasn't that long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that we were talking about servers that were maxing out at 8 and 16 gigs of memory. The world's changed dramatically over the last 5 years. But to your point, the thing that I really, if I'm in your shoes, the thing I really want to avoid, because we can get these price points down very, very low and meet the price points and the solution needs that you may have today. But the thing I really want to avoid, or I would want to avoid if I'm in your shoes, is that I start with an iSCSI, with an Ethernet SAN today, and 2 years from now I acquire another company or my business is going through the roof, and we bring in a time and attendance application or a billing application, and the manufacturer demands that that has to go through a specific protocol, a fiber channel protocol to a fiber channel SAN, well, then that makes my investment that I made today completely obsolete. I got to rip and replace, or I got to add something else, and I'm in a quandary. This architecture does not have those same issues. When we talk about the unified fabric and really the goal of this architecture, it is simply when I go ahead and bring in that fiber channel SAN because the business requires it, I plug in a cable and connect it up. My solution right here, this stack, can handle it all. And that's one of the reasons, again, I like a lot of the storage manufacturers out there. We work with them all. One of the reasons why I do like that EMC array, and I should have updated that slide, it can handle any protocol. It can handle 1 gig, 10 gig, fiber channel over Ethernet. I mean, you name it, it can go ahead and handle it.
And we're running this one out in the lobby on a 1 gig switch.
Yep.
I mean, we're running this for this demo for this audience that's going to get to see a little bit later on a standard Ethernet switch with basically a single chassis SAN and 2 servers to handle the CPU load of what we're going to get to in a minute from Andrew that sort of is driving what's really important. But again, back to the main thing is we're talking about small business being able to acquire equipment in the same type of cycle without having to spend significantly more, and then really probably spend ultimately less because they're able to consolidate. Quite frankly, to some degree, get better efficiencies. IT now can say, well, instead of having to spend that much on servers, I can take that money and actually deploy it towards business driver components.
Yeah, exactly, and to the point where ultimately future-proof the environment. So everyone always talks about, Cisco with the Catalyst architecture. People have had Catalyst, switches in their data center for more than 10 years. They can't say the same thing for server infrastructure, server switches. And that's what Cisco is bringing to the market, that type of longevity and investment protection to commodity-based hardware, Intel processors, Samsung memory. So absolutely, at the price points that are, competitive from a server capacity, but longevity-wise, the legacy Cisco advantages.
So to switch gears, we've got you. So Bruce asked us, do more with less, maximize what I've got. And one thing we didn't talk about maximize what we've got that I think we'll talk about in the back end, Andrew, is if I'm a small business that has a bunch of commodity servers that maybe I don't really need to get rid of them yet, they haven't aged out, or maybe I want to rearrange things, there's some things we can do with Citrix to take advantage of the existing commodity infrastructure to possibly buy us some more time with the VD out of box kind of thing. But what I want to ask about now is I see a number of people who brought their devices, so that's great. A number of people brought their devices. That's great because that obviously makes me hope that we actually got our design done right here. But how many endpoints did you tell me earlier that you actually use?
I've got 4 with me today, and I'm traveling. Typically on a typical day, I'm probably about 6 devices.
How many are you using?
I have at least 6, and then when you think about how many devices you have at home that are connected to the network, I mean, there's dozens.
So I did the math because you said that earlier, and I thought, there's no way you're using 7. I did the math, and I've got 6. Between my phone, my iPad, my laptop, my office computer, my home computer. Oh, by the way, I have an Android tablet, and mine are all R&D guys. I do everything for R&D, so I get all these cool toys. That's how I justify having them. But I mean, realistically, people have an average 3 devices: a laptop, a desktop, and a phone. Mm-hmm. And they're all wanting to get to their data, their applications, no matter what the device is. I mean, that's what we're ultimately wanting to get to. And the other thing is that we've got an issue of mobility now. When was the last time you were in your office? I think you said it was the last time you and I met in the Cisco office, the last time you were physically there.
Yeah, there's no such thing as an office.
And you travel 50% plus of your time. So we're not in any one location where we're able to say, this is where I'm going to connect to my corporate office from anymore. So going and looking at the issue that Bruce asked us about with how do we give people access to the same applications whenever they are and wherever they are. So this gets to the work shifting, the idea that those of us who are here are truly committed to our organizations aren't working 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're working 6 a.m. when we get up in the morning before we get the kids ready. We're working at 9 p.m. as we put the kids to bed. We're working on the weekends. I mean, heck, some of us are working on their vacations.
So I pretty much say if you have a phone that you can get your email on, you now work 24 hours.
So how do we enable people to work where they want and when they want and how they want? What's the first step? I mean, the problem is I've got these applications trapped to my Word is trapped to the device. And oh, by the way, Microsoft licensing, I bought that copy of Office. So if I want to have it on 3 more devices, I'm going to potentially, when I've acquired it, pay 3 more copies of it. So what are we doing to disconnect?
That's exactly what we're doing. So the whole point is I don't know if any of you have been in this experience before, but I've been in organizations where literally if you wanted to do a certain task, you had to go to a certain machine because that was the only one that ran that software. All right, so that's probably about the worst case. Most of the time, we're just dealing with, I have my work stuff on this one, I have my personal stuff on this one. If I need to do different things, I might have to log in somewhere else. So we're looking at all these different, well, where is my information, where are my applications? So if we take them off of those endpoint devices where we're used to having them run, all right, and virtualize and move them back into the data center, we then have the opportunity to deliver them really pretty much wherever we want. So most commonly back to those original devices. So instead of having that PC in front of me running Office, now Office is running back in my data center. And I'm really, for the most part, just watching it. Okay, when we were talking about devices, the thing ran through my mind as I've got like 3 or 4 streaming media players now in my home. All right, so we have all of these content devices. So we're used to this idea of, well, it's actually happening somewhere else and we're just watching it here. All right, so we can put it back to those same devices, but more importantly, we can start putting onto other devices, things that we never could run those applications on. All right, so you can run Microsoft Word on, I bought a Google Nexus 7, literally put my order in the day it was announced. Okay, so I can have Microsoft Word on it. Well, do I actually have Word on it? No, it's running somewhere else, but I can get to the application I want and the data I want regardless of what device I have, regardless of where I'm at. And that's really what our goal is by taking those applications off of those devices which fail. All right, so an endpoint device, how many of you have ever had your computer crash and you lost something? Okay. The rest of you who didn't raise your hand?
Will.
Get ready. It'll happen.
Well, now you said data center, so I want to go back. So one of my jobs here, I promised myself and Brian and the rest of the team was I'd keep this focus both to enterprise and small business. So data center, we're really saying wherever our servers happen to be living, right?
Right.
Okay, so data center is
data center is a concept.
Not an actual, you've got to go have a data center. We're not talking about going down to Cox and renting out 4 racks to be able to do this.
Right, we're talking about this is the place where my critical stuff is.
Okay.
Okay, so whether it's my servers, my storage, my networking, it's really kind of where all the important stuff lives. And it's just, so data center is a concept the way, honestly, desktop and application is a concept.
So with the idea of moving these IO, basically these IOs and this memory need and processor need back into the data center, we're able to present it using a unified, basically, application front to get them to there as long as they can run that application to connect.
Right, as long as they can connect, so as long as there's connectivity, then you have access. One of the descriptors that Citrix always uses is cable TV. Doesn't really matter what your television is, as long as you've got the box, or satellite for that matter, as long as you've got the box, you can watch content.
So we're talking about the idea of having less computing cycles, which means devices that don't have the, so if I take my iPhone, it may not have the processing power to run certain applications that, because I'm running in the data center, I'm just doing presentation, they can run, which would also mean that down the road, potentially depending on what my job is, I might be able to go from a full thick desktop, which I've probably let live longer because I didn't need as much processing power, to thin clients or other devices. I mean,
absolutely.
So we're able to move that cost out of, I'm not stuck with one device, but I'm also able to extend those life of those devices because I'm not buying the processing power there.
Exactly. So when that endpoint device gets to where it can't run things anymore, well, it can just connect to wherever things are running and deliver next year's software. So I don't know how quickly all of us will go to Windows 8, but, well, you probably have Windows 8, you have machines that you won't be able to run Windows 8 on.
Okay. So we're able to extend those units' lives, which is good for business as cash flow control, and we're able to buy it more cost effectively. So what happens if there's certain things that I actually need to do local? I mean, because obviously, like I said, my iPhone's not going to stream HD video, or I'm not going to be able to get certain things to run as well on some of these devices. So is there a way for me to have certain components, I mean, especially video, right? That's what has Citrix's biggest problem been for years? It's been, well, you've got this issue of getting processed back here, and you're trying to run HD video over a screen share effectively, and it stunk. So
it's much better now.
Obviously.
So obviously every single version it gets a lot better, but what we have to look at is actually that the cable TV model comes in much better. You've got that high-end cable box, but if you've got an old tube TV, oh, you don't get a lot of performance out of it. But you have a brand new HD, 3D capable, you get all the bells and whistles. The same thing is very similar when we're talking about Citrix. With certain endpoints, we're going to get more than with others. All right, and if we have to be disconnected, because everything we've been talking about so far, we've said, well, we've got to be connected because it's not running here, it's running somewhere else. There's also technologies that let us take those applications and instead of really installing them on those end devices, packaging but still running them there. So if I've got the capability to run them, I can run them and not have to be connected.
So you're about running them offline.
Run them offline, yes.
So we're talking about the ability to run. If I've got the right device, HD video may run from my local device. If I don't, we may be actually doing a presentation from the data center. If I'm disconnected, it may be that we package this thing up and we're actually running it local while I'm on a cruise ship where I don't want to pay $45 a day for internet connection.
Right, right. So whether that's an application that's going to run completely locally, or whether it's like you're talking about with video, where it actually will say, okay, well, what's Rob connecting from today? Oh, well, he can run this video, he can watch this Flash video directly because it has a Flash player, so I'm just going to send him the video and he's going to watch it locally. But now he's on an iPad, which can't do Flash, and so we're going to run it back on a server somewhere and present just the resulting video.
And the software's making that decision. No, we're not all stuck trying to look at which one am I on, how am I going to do it. We're actually letting the software make those.
Absolutely.
The AI we talked about earlier today that you hope eventually comes out.
Plus, look, I mean, connectivity's gotten so much better. I mean, I remember when I was at Citrix back in '97, connecting up over a 14.4 dial-up connection. Now, I mean, that phone that I have, I can be on 75 connected and get a great interface and great connectivity. I mean, that is one challenge about today is that you simply can't be disconnected. I mean, not even on a flight. I remember telling people the last time that I've been truly on quote-unquote vacation from work is when I was having surgery done on my shoulder, and they put me to sleep. And they were taking my vitals, and they go, I can't believe you're so calm. I go, what do you mean? I go, you're going to put me to sleep, and no one's going to call me? I'm not going to deal with anybody at all. This is a great vacation. I mean, you simply can't be disconnected today.
So we're giving people the ability to work where they want from the device they want. So, I mean, again, this goes back to the idea that corporate IT especially, and even smaller IT organizations, we have finite resources. So we're notoriously said that we say the word no. And I think we don't really mean to say the word no. What we're saying is there's a finite resource there, and we're making the logical decision that we can't do this. But we're taking the ability to say, okay, just because this application wasn't written to run on a Mac or wasn't written to run on an Android device, we're taking most of those problems away. Now, not all of them, because I mean, there's certain, we were talking about applications earlier that do certain things that don't play nice. I mean, there's always that business line application that we're probably going to have to run potentially in-house, but more and more we're taking that limitation away of the endpoint.
Right.
Well, not only that too, but I mean, think about it. One of the things I'd always run into over at Citrix was, well, we're just going to go to web-based applications. Well, I run 3 different web browsers. So that web browser is a client application because I have to run a certain web browser to go ahead and do my, my expenses. I have to run another browser to go ahead and do, our CRM application. So the nice thing about having that unified protocol is that let the data center provide the browser that they need for that web-based application.
So okay, so we talk about being able to maximize utility, make it more flexible. When we get into the idea of securing the data, so I go back to Batman, right? We go to Bruce Wayne. He doesn't want the Batmobile being printed from someone's home computer. Are we within the software able to limit what we're getting to if we want to, and maybe even from what we're getting to?
You're absolutely more secure.
Okay.
Okay, because well, I'm going to say data center again, but the first place, all your data now lives in your data center. All right, so it's not an individual person's machine. We started out talking about how much I travel. I can't tell you the last time I've been through an airport and not heard, will so-and-so come back to security for a lost item. Most of the time, it's a phone or a laptop.
HIPAA issues.
HIPAA issue is a great one. We're
PCI
talking medical.
issues.
Okay, all that type of stuff, that information is critical, and especially when we talk small and medium business, what's the most valuable thing? I mean, okay, a phone, yeah, it's an annoyance. Do you have a client list on it? Okay, your most valuable thing in most cases is your customers. Okay, the information about your customers, not even talking HIPAA or anything like that. So we're inherently a little bit more secure because we know where our data is. all right, just from a control as well as an availability standpoint. We know it's going to be there. We know we're not going to lose it ever. Go back to your laptop crashes, everything's gone.
But we can, again, but can I add additional layers of security in regards to file download,
Certainly.
print,
Right, so
and device access?
Application by application even. So not even just user by user, but I can say for this application, you mentioned a CRM app, maybe for this CRM app, you are not allowed to print anything unless you're in the office. We can do that kind of thing. We can make those kind of changes by device. So if we're not sure about the security, maybe we don't trust Apple, okay, or we hear about some new hack on an Android app, maybe we say, okay, well, we can still deliver your applications, but we're not going to let you save anything. We're not going to let you print. Okay, and one of the examples that I give is we can even do it by how you're connecting. All right, so when you're in the office, you might have access to different applications than when you connect to Starbucks, even though you're on the same device. All right, so we get a lot of rules that we can set about how can you interact with your data, how can you interact with your applications.
So to the last point, because again, I want to make sure we get through all the things that Bruce asked us to solve, because I don't want to let down Alfred and Lucius. In regards to disaster recovery, disaster business continuity, by doing virtualization, inherently we're at the server level even. Mm-hmm. 2 servers are inherently more redundant than 1. Mm-hmm. The applications are now stored on a SAN that has larger drive arrays, which means more potential drive failure before we lose the storage. And then we're talking about potentially even be able to maybe move some of these servers. Maybe we run most of our processing power out of our office, but some of it lives in a colo for the other part?
Absolutely, and it can be completely transparent. Okay, so from a user standpoint, we can make it so regardless of what device you're on, where you are, how you're connecting, what your data, how you're getting to there, you just always have to worry about going to one place. And you will get connected whether it's the physical location, whether it's a disaster recovery site that's set up for emergencies, whether it's the cloud because you have some applications out there.
So we started working on geolocation issues, and that's one of the things. We don't have very many issues, but I mean, obviously, standard business continuity says 100-mile geo to give yourself that continuity, and that's obviously gets into bandwidth and other issues. Mm-hmm. But this is going to reduce the need for that bandwidth potentially because we're not driving the full stream of data; we're driving presentation.
Correct.
Okay. Well, on that same line, then the next slide we've got in front of us is the PC to the cloud era. And we've been talking about virtualization, and cloud plays into that. And we can all thank Microsoft for running those wonderful ads that told us what the cloud was, which is watching your videos while you're sitting in the airport, which is wrong. But, the cloud is about utility computing. We talked about this the other day, was the cloud's true definition is the ability to turn up and down that which you are using, usually self-fulfilled, and pay for what you're consuming, like the lights when we turn them on and off here, or these wonderful lights here that are, I'm sure, costing a lot of money as they're blinding us. So it is by default virtualization, then cloud computing?
It's a step in the right direction. Okay, so virtualization by itself is not cloud, but it's one of the underlying things that you have to have because it gives you the kind of flexibility and adjustment that you need for a cloud environment.
So we're talking about the servers. So we talk about the idea that, I can build a self-fulfilled cloud. So I start off with a couple rack mount servers. And I know Cisco makes some really cool high-end stuff, and we don't address it here because, quite frankly, the B-series products in their own right can take 4 or 5 hours to talk about. But we start with a couple rack mount servers and then eventually need to grow to a more cloud computing, and that scalability is built into that virtualization?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a rip and replace concept. So, if you start with the rack mount servers that you see out there today, and we all know what it takes to go ahead and install an operating system, whether it's a hypervisor or Microsoft operating system on a server, you have MAC addresses, UUID. I mean, there's just so many components and personalities of that server. One of the things that we've done, and one of the main reasons we got into this market, of course, with the unified fabric concept, is to actually abstract the personality and the individual components of the server from that physical hardware and actually build it into the network. So, a good analogy to use is if you all have a cell phone in here and you smash the cell phone or you want to get a new cell phone, you don't have to physically go into a cell phone provider and have them configure your cell phone. I mean, you have to do that with servers and computers today. Why can't we have the same concept where if I get a new phone, I get the iPhone 5 that's coming out, why can't I go ahead and just put in my phone number and have my profile move over from my other phone to this new phone? It works today in the cell phone world. It doesn't work in the server world. That's what we've done. We've taken all of those identifiers out of the server, MAC addresses, BIOS, boot order, firmware, network connectivity. I mean, there's hundreds of them. And we've actually built them into the switch, built them into the network. So yes, if you do decide to start with a few rack mount servers like we have out there today, and then you want to manage it with our switch infrastructure, you end up purchasing the switch infrastructure that can handle both our rack mounts and our blades. And now the identity of all of your servers, whether it's 2 servers, or if you've booked a flight on Expedia or Delta or American Airlines over the last 3 years, you're booking a flight on a Cisco server. They manage 4,000 servers via single management domain. So that's all done by bringing the intelligence and the concept of the components into the network. So absolutely, you can start with 2 servers and then obviously build into a unified compute system managed with the network.
So back to the cloud computing concept, the self-fulfillment concept. So if we're taking Citrix and we build it into our servers in our office, we in fact have probably built to some degree, to the end user's perspective at least, the cloud, because they can now self-provision. It's, here are the applications that are available to you, which ones do you want to run? And in some cases, they self-configure themselves. So for an IT standpoint, where we get new user ad requests that historically might take us 2 or 3 or 4 days to provision everything, go out to the desktop, we're actually able to give them the right to say, okay, we've done the base level stuff, now here it is, self-fulfill the rest of it.
Absolutely. So building an enterprise app store for all the applications that you might possibly need. All right, moving away from the idea of, oh, we have a new employee, I'm going to find them some system, I'm going to put in everything they might possibly ever need, because that's the way we do it.
And configure it right.
Everybody gets the same thing.
Yeah, you configure it right to begin with.
Hopefully nothing interacts with each other. And then they have all this stuff, and they probably use give them a lot more resources than they needed, because for the first week they're going to need their email. Okay, they're probably not going to need much more than that. All right, so we have the opportunity now by setting it up for self-service, setting it up for external access. We have a framework where we naturally come to bring your own device. All right, because if the user can pick the applications that they need, okay, from a list that's been approved, and all they need to do to quote, get the application is click on a button and it's now available to them, or worst case, they click on a button which then generates a workflow so their supervisor has to click on another button and then they get the application.
So we're talking about Apple iStore. So for this event, I wanted to be able to control this from my iPad, and I didn't call tech support and say, hey, I need an application to screen control my laptop from my iPad. I went to the Apple store and I said, oh, there's 4 or 5. Okay, that's the one I want. Click. And now there was no approval structure there for IT to tell me whether I could do it or not. But we're talking about the same kind of concept, the pre-approved. I mean, Apple pre-approved those apps as being stable, but now we're talking about giving the same kind of iStore experience to people to then. Do you want Word? Do you need Excel? If you don't need PowerPoint, don't download it. Oh, you might need access. And instead of IT having to have all these giant checklists and be absolutely right to begin with, because God forbid, that's one of the biggest, I think, the biggest IT failures, in my opinion, is that new user setup, because it's never the same thing. I don't care how many lists we make, that new guy is never going to fit the bucket we built. And he's going to need that one thing different, and then we're going to have screwed it up, and then his first week's going to be a miserable starting experience. So that's what we're talking about giving people.
Right, and if I can use you as an example, you're part of the problem, okay, because of exactly what you just talked about doing. So that's one of the real challenges that we have in environments now is we've got technology-savvy users who are used to a framework where if they need to do something, they just go and get it. So really we have an opportunity, instead of having that problem continue, well, let's internalize it and make it available to them. So the first place that they look now is our own app store. So if they find hey, I need something to do something like this, they don't go and find some download site, which probably is going to bring a lot of other stuff down with it. They're going to go to this internal app store, find the application that does what they're looking for, click a button, and it's now available to them.
So the next step would be, so we've given the end user in our office that potential cloud experience. Really, then the next thing really isn't that much more of a leap is we take the computing power out of our control and begin to buy it from and I'll use this, Amazon's not always the right answer, but an Amazon where I'm literally paying for the clocks or a rack space or an artisan where I'm putting that computing power. And sorry, I'm sure you're selling Cisco to those guys instead of us now, but so we're now getting that on a utility function instead of an in-office function, but we're still using the same
delivery framework, right? Yeah. Right, because what we're looking at is when the applications and even the desktops aren't tied to a specific device. Okay, they really can be anywhere, and that's what we're talking about with disaster recovery. We're benefiting from the fact that they can be anywhere, and so that doesn't have to be my location anymore. And in many cases, that's even preferable because, well, my location doesn't necessarily have to be there anymore. What's the purpose, back to you? I mean, how many people are actually in the Cisco office anymore?
Not many. Not many. I mean, from what I understand, there's hundreds of people that work out of Atlanta, and I've probably never seen more than 15 of them at the office. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
We gave Bruce Wayne all the answers he needed, and I think in an indirect way, we talked about work shifting, the ability to work where you want, when you want. Server virtualization, which, Citrix has a server virtualization product, but if I happen to be a VMware or even a Hyper-V Microsoft guy, can I still run your desktop on the top of that?
So that's one of the, again, if Citrix is selling this message, we want to create these flexible environments so you can optimize what resources you've got, well, we've got to be open to that too. So you can work on top of Hyper-V, on top of VMware, or Zen Server, which is Citrix's own product.
So we've got the servers, VDI being virtual desktop infrastructure for doing the desktop virtualization, at SaaS, so software as a service, both private cloud and public cloud. We pretty much have gone through all of the things that I had originally said I'd hoped terminology-wise to give some meaning to today, and I think we've given a good framework for what we wanted to message deliver. I want to turn over to an audience Q&A really quick, and I know there's some mics, and they're going to pass around so that we can hear, because obviously Batman's playing in other places, and we get to hear the level there, so hopefully we'll hear you through it too. But while they're doing the mics and going out and finding the first question, so please if you have a question, raise your hand. I had some questions actually asked of me before the event. So people said, are you going to answer these questions? So I'll ask those while they're running around, finding this first group of people. One of the questions I was asked was, so does that mean I have to buy less Microsoft?
Microsoft will always get you.
Okay.
and this is one of the things that is part of the larger discussion is if any of you have gone through a server virtualization project, one of the things that you look at is, well, what are we actually doing with all these different servers we say we have? Okay, how much resources do we really need? Not what we bought, but back to your point, what we're actually using. In a desktop virtualization project, and I'm going to use a broader term, we do that with users. Okay, so there are a lot of different options. Yes, there is going to be some Microsoft license that has to be potentially bought, depending on what you've got, no matter what. All right, but there's a lot of ways we can optimize it. There are some licenses that you buy once and they're good until Microsoft changes their licensing model. There's others that you pay for every single year.
Or every month.
Or every month.
I mean, Citrix and Microsoft both have the ability to literally go to full utility computing on one of these cycles.
And pay month to month on what you're actually using.
Up and down.
Which if I could get cable that way, I would buy cable.
I'd buy 2 channels, and I'd pay $400 probably for those 2 channels. But so Microsoft's still going to get us, but there are potentially ways for us to better model the Microsoft.
Right. If we don't just stick with, well, everybody gets a desktop and all these applications.
Office Pro and
right. If we're flexible and looking at what do people actually need, then very definitely we can move to a model where we may not have as much licensing.
Or we might have the right license instead of over-licensed.
Right.
So I think, quite frankly, I'd argue that while a lot of us may not be perfectly licensed, I'd argue we're probably as over-licensed as we're under-licensed. So.
Right. Generally, it's the, okay, my choice is A and B. Which one gives Microsoft more money? Okay, I'm going to go with that one.
Now, with you talk about doing the actual virtual PC, which we have Go to My PC from you guys. You mentioned this earlier to me today, which is something I didn't put in the deck, but I want to ask about real quick. With Microsoft, if I want to use iPad with the new Windows 8 and the new server coming out, there's a new license they're wanting to get me for, but we're actually saying that if I have a Windows desktop, I'm actually able to use a corporate Go to My PC client now to actually just leverage a connection to that instead of to a data center.
Right, so it's actually using the same technology we would connect to a virtual desktop in the data center. but the difference is you put it on a desktop PC. So there's still some infrastructure pieces you have to have running so people can connect, but it gives you a way. So I always talking about the mixed environment. We've talked a lot about people who are never in the office, but what about those people who are always in the office and have a traditional desktop, and that's what makes sense. I always talk about it if you've ever been in whole company meetings or group meetings where you've got inside and outside people. You come in, you got a dozen people in the room, and 6 of them are there with their laptops, and 6 people are there with pen and paper. Okay, who are the field people and who are the office people? All right, so what we have this technology now called remote PC. So using the same framework, those in-office only workers now could get to their desktop from an iPad or whatever their famous device is, internally and then also externally if I want them to allow them to do that.
So, question in the audience.
Don't be shy. Talk a little bit about how to...
Oh, there we go.
Is this thing on?
It is on.
Hey, I noticed it was quite fitting that you used Bruce Wayne, and we didn't include one thing here which he doesn't have to worry about, and that's money. How do you, has the upfront capital expenditure to get into like VDI gone down?
So that was the thing I mentioned. That was the perfect time as it comes back to the question I said I'd answer earlier. So Citrix actually acquired a company, and I'll speak for this topic because I actually get to play with it now, a company that made a product called VDI in a box. So one of the problems with doing any of this stuff was a lot of the capital expenditure, we've got to buy new servers, sorry, and a lot of times cycle isn't there for us to buy them. With VDI in a box, you're actually able to take I'll call it a white box, any basically commodity server, and install software on it that will, based on its capacity, its processing capacity, memory, a certain number of virtual desktops on it. So I can just take any old box I got and slap it on there, and I might run 10, 15 desktops. Well, what happens if I got 2? I can install it on both of them. And now I can share those 2 resources, even though they're in disparate boxes, that they're one. If I have 3, and I have 3 of them, and they can start load sharing across them. So from a small business perspective, and I operate a small business like many of you, I have sub 50 employees. So this kind of technology lets me say, well, I've got all this piece of server sitting around that I might have been running terminal server on in the past. Now I can convert them to VDI, and it's an extremely cost-effective way of doing it so that I can get that first step in if I'm not ready to go to maybe XenApp, or I'm not ready to go out and buy the processing capacity within one server, so that maybe I can use those 2, 3, 4 servers for the next year or 2. When it's time to refresh those 4, maybe now I'm buying 1. And so that's where you get into the cost savings, where you're trying to do 2 things: maximize what you have, and then when I have to buy, maximize what I'm about to buy. So, and I'll tell you that XenApp and XenDesktop are cost effective if done correctly for down to 10, 15 people. As a reseller of these products, a company that needs 10 or 15 people remotely, you can do it cost effectively, even if you were just historically doing a terminal server, and more securely, because quite frankly, right now, any organization that is not embracing work shifting and working from other locations, your employees are doing it to you. Your employees have installed TeamViewer, they've installed GoToMyPC, they've installed VNC Viewer, and unless you are managing your firewall to lock all that down, they're beating you. So this is when do we catch up with them? But cost effectively, yes, I think we finally have, because for years we didn't. But I think we finally do have a cost where we can do that, for a small business cost effectively.
Realistically, we're at a price point now with VDI in a box that you can go to desktop virtualization at about the same cost as a new business class PC.
That's what's changed dramatically. I mean, if you think about this, cloud computing back in the 90s was called ASP. Mm-hmm. Then, in the 2000s it was called utility computing. But cost and security were the 2 barriers to getting into it. So if you think about it now, yeah, it's great we have servers that we can put over a terabyte of memory in there. Well, that may be overkill for a lot of organizations. So think about it, 5 years ago, a server with 8 gigs of memory may cost $10,000, $15,000. That same one today, with those specifications, maybe, like you said, would be what a business PC would cost.
About $2,000.
Yeah.
Right now is base price for a decent with 8 to 16 gigs.
Yeah, so that may, and again, that's where it gets into, don't go out and buy a server that has a terabyte of memory in it, and then figure out what application you're going to do and deploy. Go ahead and get 2 smaller servers so you have the redundancy, and then you get into the price point to start with, but without backing yourself into a corner, because you may start with 8 gigs of memory today, but don't be forced to go ahead and have to add memory or add capacity by buying 5 more servers. Build it so that you may start with 8 gigs of memory today, but that same server has enough capacity or capability to grow to get you to 128 gigs of memory or so on.
What was the other question? You have another question?
I do. It's actually a two-part question for the Cisco guy.
Oh boy.
Everything I've seen out of Cisco is not really. It doesn't really address the needs of the real small business between, say, 5 and 25 employees. Everything Cisco has that I've seen so far kind of kills the fly with the sledgehammer. Do you guys have, one, specific hardware product that would address a small business with 25 users? And two, are you continuing your end of sale, end of life terms? Your end of sale, end of life for your past products ranges anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Has that lengthened any?
And are we
or does Cisco continue to lock you in and make you upgrade?
Yeah. And are we talking specifically about the server space or holistically?
I can give you an example. ICS 77050, UCS, or I'm sorry, the MCS servers. I've had solutions that I've implemented that have lasted 2 years before end of sale, end of life, and I've had solutions that have lasted 3 to 5 years. And also, it looks like when you guys go up 3 software revision levels, you end of life the software and the licenses. Is that going to continue with this virtualization platform?
And that's where we're seeing, and it's one of the reasons why I came on board, because I'm not one of the historical networking people. And that was always, well, again, one of the biggest knocks against Cisco was, the cost, the support cost, again, some of the churn on the products. And they brought, again, me from the background that I have, they brought a lot of people over from, Sun, HP, IBM, and Dell to more model the expectations of the server industry. So from a refresh cycle and end-of-life cycle, we're in line with where the rest of the industry is. Our roadmap is built off of Intel's roadmap. So when they come out, for example, the new E5 processors, the Romley processors were released about 2 or 3 months ago. We came out with our Generation 3 blades and rack mount servers that are out here. So we'll continue to go ahead and follow the roadmap for our servers based off of Intel's roadmap. As far as the fabric, that's where our goal is to learn, again, not to repeat some of the sins of the past, and to go ahead and not have the churn that we had from a software perspective. So we've been able to go ahead and look at some of the resources we were able to bring over from Citrix and VMware, and we want to model more of our management software and framework for the server market based off of what we've seen there. So if you're pleased with what Citrix has done over the last 10, 15 years, I think you'll be pleased with our direction from a server and server management roadmap, because we want to align it more along the lines of those than traditional Cisco.
Now, to answer one other part of his question about the small business, I think Cisco does have a solution set at 5 to 25. I mean, their UC500 platform, they've got small business products. Now, the catch-22 is do they have small business products that had every feature set the enterprise has? Because some of the products you're talking about aren't absolutely geared at 5 to 25 employees. They're geared at solving certain problems that maybe you have an enterprise issue within a small organization. So there's that catch-22 of small business by size, small business by need. If, within the small business portfolio, do they have a managed wireless infrastructure? Sure. Is it going to scale to 100 employees and do all automatic roaming and do all the bells and whistles that the enterprise will do with radios? No. So there's that catch-22. And I think from the small business products, Cisco did a really good job when they acquired Linksys. The products they took and renamed them into the Cisco portfolio. We had some consternation about the renaming of things, but the products live. So again, now Linksys is it's that home business stuff, but they took a number of really good things from that and applied it to a set where they actually acknowledged they missed. I mean, 5 years ago, we got asked to join, it was about 5 years ago, we got asked to join the Small Business Executive Exchange for Cisco, which was their attempt to basically take resellers and say, what do you need to deliver to small businesses? And we're going to develop, and so we were there when they were first showing out these phone systems and these wireless controllers, and we're like, this is horrible. And they've listened in that space, so I think they are pursuing it. Now, I think every manufacturer has that, and I've lived in this industry now for 15 years. My favorite manufacturer, 3Com, had a phone system that was built in '98. They still were trying to support in 2010. And at a certain point, you reach the end of the useful life with it. 10 years, I think, is where you're going to start running into that length. But if we can get them to go to 10 years on, infrastructure. And I'm seeing more and more of it be there, but I'm also seeing where when massive advances come along, they're still having to kill things. They're still having to say, hey, we're going to support it for another 5 years, but we can't keep selling it. We can't keep delivering on it because the next thing can't run on that processor. And that's usually what we've run into.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a few specifics. With MCS, again, historically we've had to use the other OEM server hardware to run the call center applications on. So that was one of the other goals, was to go ahead and bring more control over that and have our own servers to go ahead and support it so we can do more development directly against it and extend some of those life cycles. And then number two, we do use TAC, the technical support like we spoke about early on in the presentation. But interestingly enough, we don't have SmartNet on our servers. It's called something completely different. It's actually what we call it, UCS. One of the most common ones is UCS 7 support. So it's a warranty and service support for servers, so that it's more in line with the expectations of the industry from a price and service delivery standpoint. Because SmartNet for route switch doesn't necessarily match up with what the expectations have been in the industry for the last 10 years for a server platform. So there are some differences, so that we're not coming into a market and saying that, hey, we're going to support this completely different to what you've been experiencing for the last 10 years from the server manufacturers out there. We want to have innovation and a better solution and ideally better support, but it's going to be modeled with the same expectations. If you have expectations of 24/7 by 4-hour on-site support, then again, if a fan fails in the server, we will have a new one out there within 4 hours. The advancements that we've made is we put some technologies into the management so that, especially if you're connecting it up and all of your servers are managed in the network and your internal network, we have call home features so that if a fan does go out in the server, it can proactively notify Cisco support, TAC, and TAC will go ahead and call you and say, hey, did you have a fan go out on your server, or are you doing maintenance on that server? If you had a fan go out, and let's say it's sitting in the colo like we spoke about, you don't even have to be there. You can send a beacon light down to the server, and when the engineer shows up there within 4 hours, you can have that engineer go ahead and replace the fan. After it's replaced, say, hey, go ahead and give me a call. It's the server with the blue beacon light on it. Go ahead and call me when you're done, and they can call you when they're done. So yeah, we do want to have similarities and competitiveness with the industry, but we do want to have innovation as well.
Other questions? Any other questions you might have?
I can definitely, I'm not the person to handle the route switch stuff, but I can have you help someone that can do that.
Hey, Rob, one question that got asked was, how do you make sure that devices that you don't want on the network don't get on? Someone goes out and buys an iPad, but you don't want them to be able to get on it before authorizing them in some way. How does that person get kept off?
So there's obviously a couple of ways we can obviously do that.
There's a couple of different ways. One of the first thing you always think about is physical layer, which
wireless.
Sounds weird to say when you're talking wireless. So you may keep your wireless network secure, and you have to authorize the device to connect. If you provided outside access for remote users, then, well, they're going to be able to connect somehow. All right, so then we've got to do it at that level and using some of the Citrix's access technology. So you've got to get into the network to get to your applications. So what's sitting on that edge is what controls it, and there are Citrix technologies that can look at what kind of device it is, and you could say a blanket rule that says no iPad unless it's been pre-authorized, or only certain types of devices, down to the level of if it's a Windows device and it doesn't have current antivirus, they can't connect. Okay, so there's a lot of rules using various different components that you can set to set very specific criteria. And that's the same technology that I was saying you would use to say that, well, when you're in the office, you have these applications available, and when you're at Starbucks, maybe you have a subset of those.
Any other questions?
So with the VDI infrastructure, we've been recently deploying some thin clients in our office, and one of the big challenges we've come to is supporting USB devices like scanners and microphones. How has that changed?
Use presenting applications or desktops?
Desktops.
Okay, every version, so Citrix and Desktop 5.6 Feature Pack 1 was just released. USB support is gets better every single version. That's actually one of the reason I asked is that's one of the reasons why you say virtual desktop versus just applications is typically that device support is much better with a virtual desktop. Beyond that, then we get back into the standard definition television versus high def. And I hate to say this, but it may depend on the client device that you're using, the thin client. Okay, so Windows-based thin clients typically behave a lot better because they recognize those devices better. With Linux-based devices, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It may depend on the specific device. There's also a lot of policies where certain types of devices by default are not recognized. So for the system to recognize those devices, that policy maybe specifically need to be enabled.
Well, you also have the other problem with and we talked about this earlier, the other problem you have is the actual application itself. I was telling you about the application. So I've got a business line application where my client is trying to deploy over a VDI infrastructure, and the application is actually doing net use command calls to remap LPT ports to network printer devices so the application can print. Okay, well, that had nothing to do with the VDI problem. You know, the USB port printer I plugged in isn't the issue. I can print that thing all day long from Word and everything else, but the business line app is actually, sometimes you run into it's not even the VDI's problem, it's going to be the drivers and the way the application uses it as much as the device, and the application has to catch up with virtual desktop. And that's what we're running into more and more is where, you know, the Citrix is supporting more and more endpoints to connect to it. Now we're having to get the applications to think about how they were written to take better advantage of it also.
I usually put it in the framework of, well, that's the application that Bob's cousin wrote that summer he wasn't working. You know, a lot of times those homegrown
Sometimes it's not just those.
Aren't
I got one
necessarily,
Microsoft
yeah,
one.
right. So a lot of times it's the way that something was originally put together, but a commercial application should be done properly, okay? But there's guilty parties on all sides. So one of the things would be is if it's a blanket issue or if it's a certain application. And like I said, the things to look at would be one thing on the policy side, to make sure those types of devices are enabled. And there's some tricks to do that, to specifically extend that, as well as the type of thin client. And then you get into the, you know, how much support do we really need? Is it everybody? Is it certain people?
But you also run into the problem where Citrix is going to innovate better improvements, and then the application has to catch up. It's always the chicken and the egg issue. We're always going to be cycling. Your next release of Service Pack 1 begots the next release of the software improvement, and there's always that. They can't improve it till you improve it.
Right.
So there's always that lag, too. But I see much better support for even weird things like scales. I mean, we've got a Citrix environment where we're actually using waste scales over thin clients from remote warehouses, and that's working well, where in the past I would have said there's no bloody way that's going to work. So.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to just follow up from that USB discussion real quick. Not so much on the just functionality, but the user experience piece of it. So just a general thin or zero client, so you're not running receiver on a laptop and you have local resources. But with ICA specifically, you know, my user's not going to have, you know, 300-400 megabytes per second for USB connectivity. Okay, they're going to be lucky to get, you know, a very small fraction of that, so the experience is going to suffer. But with ICA, is there a way for me to say, because I may have 500 clients out, and I can't have 500 clients each having 10 megs connections, because that's going to, you know, kill my network. So is there a way with it to say, for any experience, any of my clients, I can have a 2 meg pipe, but the USB layer within ICA, I want to burst to 5?
The generic answer is going to be yes. Okay, how you get there is going to be the bigger question.
So it's like, see you after this?
Yeah. So there are some additional, because it sounds like you're talking primarily remote users. And with remote users in play, there are some other things that can go in. Because there's a lot of quality of service that we can do and setting priorities. Okay, and when we start talking about doing that over the WAN, there are some additional pieces that may need to come into play.
Another question.
I had a follow-up question concerning the licensing. When we're talking about the applications as an app from the IT standpoint, how do I ensure if I've got users requesting and their managers approving and the application being installed that I have the appropriate licensing for the applications?
The evil question I'm going to ask is, how do you do that now?
I control what gets loaded on their machines. One at a time.
And in the virtualization environment, you are going to control how many licenses, how many copies are available. Okay, so you can put hard limits on it. There's a lot of different things that you can do.
So some of that second layer approval might be you from IT to approve, yes, we have licensing, so I can now count on my sheet. Because, yeah, one of the problems is, how the devil we know what we've got? We recently ran this with a large client. We were actually trying to shore up and true up their micro licensing. And it's like, okay, how do you actually go get that information without doing a hard walk count? And so, yeah, Microsoft, for all their licensing, doesn't make it very easy for you to then get a good count on it either, do they? So,
and I've seen situations where, again, depending on the deployment strategy, you may have a golden image of your set of applications that you roll out to users, and you blast out 100 copies of that image. You may have the opportunity, again, every environment's different, but you may have that opportunity where you realize that out of those 100 users, maybe only 5 need PowerPoint and a few other applications. So you may actually be able to get more control by doing everything a la carte from an application standpoint, knowing that you can go ahead and load it on the server side and then control access to how many people are going to be using PowerPoint. So instead of giving 100 people PowerPoint, give 5 people PowerPoint and only pay for 5 copies of PowerPoint. So
and give everybody else a PowerPoint viewer.
Yeah. So you may get an opportunity to go ahead and, again, like you said, Microsoft's always going to get their juice. But you may have the opportunity to go ahead and tighten it up and at least make it a little bit more difficult to cut it over.
So I don't want to cut this off. So I see a couple of hands up, but I do want to also be respectful of time to the end of the day and to make sure we can start, because that screen might start before I am ready for it. But we're going to be around after this. There's also on the survey we gave you the ability to check, hey, I'd like someone to follow up, and we'd be glad to follow up with additional questions and have further conversations with you. But I want to give you a chance to be able to see the demonstration that you have access to if you did BYOD. So bring your own device along. So real quick, what do we have out in the lobby? So out in the lobby, right outside to the left as you exit the theater, there's a rack that has 2 Cisco rack mount servers, an EMC, VNXE, small business SAN, a switch, and basically a UPS in it. And that's what we're driving the demonstrations you're going to see off of it. It's the same infrastructure that I would put into, depending on the exact scale, the number of servers you need, pretty much any small business that we would go deploy really any server virtualization, much less app delivery or desktop delivery. So how do you access it? So what we're going to give you a chance to use from your device if you brought it is the Zen app delivery product. Now, we have VDI in the box out on a couple of thin clients, but because of the way we have it configured, we actually just have it out there at the solution table. So if you want to see the VDI in a box solution, Jeremy and Jonathan out there will be able to show you that. If you didn't bring a device, you're also able to walk out there and use the iPad, the thin client, the old junky PC that we pulled out from under Rob's desk that he's not used in 2 years, and see how it runs these things. And yes, we did literally actually we pulled the one from Jonathan's desk. But how do I get access to it? So the first thing is you launch your Citrix receiver. I'm hoping you downloaded it. You'll need to connect to Gotham. It's an open wireless network. You'll need to then connect to the actual URL. It's going to be https zenapp.gotham.local. This will also be on the display out front in case you walk outside and can't find it. The username is actually on your badge. You're going to be Batman and a number somewhere probably between about 10 and about 75. That'll be your username. Your password is password. We made this really secure, And the domain you're going to connect to is Gotham. Inside the Zen app, and if you run into a problem going out there, please stop anybody in an Affinity shirt, or again, Jeremy and Jonathan will be out in the front. But you should be able to run Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Adobe Reader, because we talk about Adobe Reader being an issue of the scrolling problem, which has always been the issue with the Zen app, and how much better that is. We actually have the little video trailer. If you happen to not have downloaded and watched it when we put it out the 40 other times, Brian, you actually can watch our little Batman video that Brian and I shot one afternoon. We were bored for an hour. And we have some docs inside each one of those applications you can open up under the My Documents. So feel free to run any of the applications. If you run any problems with it, please let one of us know. We'll be glad to help you with that connection. And again, if you didn't bring a device, please step outside and we have those applications, the servers out there where you actually can see them and have the guy show you how to use them out there. The goal of the entire Tech Tartar series, we set this up this year, was to provide education in a meaningful format that wasn't just a tech push. This is the most tech event we had, but also it's also our largest event. We wanted to be able to give those people in technology something to see the new tech with, but also those in business a way to hear the translation between what is it in it for me and how is it going to deliver for my business. So again, I want to thank you for coming out. I appreciate your time. I hope you will look at our website again for the future events the rest of this year. We will be doing it again next year with some additional changes and additional events. If you have a suggestion of a topic, please feel free to write it on there. We love it when you tell us what you want us to show you because we'll be glad to show it to you. And someone's already started the Batman movie for us. So I am sick of hearing that music, by the way, at this point. So again, have a nice afternoon. Enjoy the movie and have a nice rest of your evening and the rest of your week. Thank you very much. And thank you all very much. Okay.